Welcome back. If you listen to the first 3 chapters, you should already have a working framework for moral boundaries, as well as an understanding of the moral red line that allows people with radically different beliefs to coexist without tearing each other apart. That boundary is not complicated, and it is rooted in natural rights. It's a boundary that says we can all coexist, no matter what we believe, until someone crosses into coercion, which requires force, threats, fraud, theft, violence, or some form of betrayal to consent. In this chapter, we're going to pivot in a different direction and see if we can't validate this from a different perspective. Because the moral universe isn't just do no evil. It's also what actually works when people are free. On the consensual side, still selfish, but consensual, that's where you find something modern society seems to have forgotten. If you refuse to look at human nature, you don't get a moral system based on reason, nor one that works. We have to look at reality if we're going to come up with realistic solutions. So buckle up, because these next few chapters are going to walk into sensitive and possibly taboo territory. I'm not trying to be edgy, nor to be cruel, but to be as efficient as I can, I want to cut through the crap without losing time to political correctness. So feel free to challenge my logic or verify anything I'm saying. But you want to grow up intellectually, you want to understand people, you want to stop being manipulated by slogans, then you need a little mental courage. So take this reality pill and let's go tumbling down this rabbit hole together. Before we go any further, I would like to address something, because if I don't, I fear it will quietly infect everything that follows. I'm not making a moral relativist argument. Moral relativism is shit. I reject moral relativism outright. Moral relativism claims that morality is subjective, that it is culturally constructed, historically contingent, or dependent on personal perspectives. Today, it's often framed as tolerant and compassionate. In reality, this is one of the most intellectually lazy and socially corrosive philosophies ever popularized. Because the moment you say there's no objective morality, you lose the ability to say that anything is actually wrong. There is no such thing as absolutely wrong to a moral relativist. Under moral relativism, slavery is only wrong by today's standards. Rape is only immoral in certain cultures. Genocide is only immoral if your society says so. Coercion is just a different moral framework, and it's a matter of opinion. That's a moral surrender, and worse, it contradicts observable human behavior. Humans respond to injustice instinctively. Toddlers protest unfairness before they can speak. Animals retaliate when cheated. Social species punish defectors even at personal cost. These reactions occur before culture, before language, before moral philosophy, which tells us something crucial. Morality is not invented. It is discovered. It is enabled through reason. I'm arguing that morality is not subjective. Morality is not culturally arbitrary. It does not originate from power. And morality is not a social construct you get to rewrite based on your feelings or political trends. Morality is aligned and constrained by human nature, and human nature is constrained by biology and genetics, and biology and genetics has been influenced by natural selection. And if a moral system violates human nature, it does not liberate people, it breaks them. These moral relativists have no answer to the innate fairness instincts. A moral framework that only functions among cooperative people is not a moral system, it's a freaking social club. Up until this point, we focused primarily on the importance of understanding the genetic and biological drivers behind moral boundaries as a basis for establishing a moral framework. Now we'll be focusing on neural and psychological differences among our species, specifically the differences between men and women. And I'm going to say this slowly because people love to pretend they misunderstood it. This is not about what I think men and women should be. This is about what men and women are, or tend to be. Human nature isn't a vote, it's history, and that history is called natural selection. Natural selection is, in simple terms, a process that favors traits which help living creatures survive and reproduce. It's basically nature's way of doing elimination trials. Imagine a population of rabbits living in freezing weather. The thicker fur rabbits survive. The thin fur rabbits freeze and die. Over time, the population becomes dominated by thick-furred rabbits because those are the ones still alive to reproduce. And here's a key point that I think some people forget. Natural selection doesn't just shape bodies, it shapes minds. It shapes temperaments, trust thresholds, aggression responses, cooperation instincts, cheater detection, revenge impulses, forgiveness tendencies. Because for social animals, especially humans, how you treat other people affects whether you survive long enough to have descendants. Now, let's just pause right here real quick because I would like to manage expectations, or at least not oversimplify the story. Yes, natural selection shapes humans. Yes, it shapes minds and bodies. And yes, it shaped instincts for cooperation, betrayal, retaliation, trust, and revenge. But humans are not just products of natural selection. Natural selection filtered us. What survived often enough, sometimes accidentally, which means part of our human nature exists not because it's good, but because luck allowed it to survive. So chance matters. Not only that, it appears not every instinct exists because it's useful. Some exist because it rode along with something else that was. That's why humans have cognitive biases, emotional overreactions, inconsistent moral intuitions, instincts that contradict each other. Also, and this matters today more than ever, evolution lags reality. Evolution is slow, but cultural change is fast. As long as humans have been alive, humans have adapted to their environment. Human instincts were shaped for small tribes, repeated interaction, immediate feedback, and visible consequences. That's the environment our brains expect, but that's no longer the environment that we live in. Modern humans have to deal with anonymity, abstraction, massive scale, delayed consequences, and symbolic enemies. So instincts that once worked now seem to misfire in today's society. Tribal loyalty becomes political fanaticism. Threat detection becomes moral panic. Status seeking becomes performative outrage. Trust collapses when consequences disappear. That's not moral decay. That's ancient instincts in a new environment. Having said that, culture can redirect, but not erase biology. Culture matters, rules matter, norms matter, and this is why this moral framework based on natural rights matter. Because our American culture rides on top of biology. It doesn't replace it. When cultural rules align with incentives, preserve feedback, allow exit, and punish defection proportionally, cooperation flourishes. And when they don't, biology pushes back. Not as wisdom, not as virtue, as resentment, as cheating, as defection, as conflict. So when people say humans are just social constructs, they're wrong. When people say biology justifies everything, they're also wrong. The truth is more complicated. We are products of selection, chance, primal instincts, and fast-moving cultural overlays, which means human behavior isn't random, but it also isn't moral by default. It's conditional. It responds to incentives. It reacts to consequences. It adapts to patterns. And once you accept that, once you stop pretending humans are angels or blank slates, the importance of this moral framework will become more and more obvious as the series continues. But to play devil's advocate, let's just say we subscribe to moral nihilism. That is to say, as ridiculous as it sounds, that morality does not exist, that there's no such thing as right and wrong. For argument's sake, let's just take this nihilistic viewpoint that morality is fiction, an illusion, or just emotional projection. Well, now, a different question comes into focus. Not, what should people do, but, given the creatures we actually are, what strategies work? And that question has already been studied, relentlessly, mathematically, without moral wish-casting. Which brings us to something that sounds academic, but explains more about human cooperation and conflict than most moral philosophy ever has. And that's game theory. But to give this game theory some context, let's go back to the hunter-gatherer life. A hunter makes a big kill. He faces a choice. Share it with the tribe, as he's expected to do and he's agreed to do, or hoard it for himself and his family. His decision has consequences, not just for his happiness, but for the survival and his ability to pass on his gene for generations. As humans grew, they formed tribes. Tribes face choices. Cooperate with the neighboring tribes through trade, alliances, mutual defense, or raid them, steal their resources, kill the men, rape the women, burn the place down. So what wins? Is it more advantageous to be a predator, to betray, to coerce, to take? Or is it more advantageous to be trustworthy, to cooperate, to build stable relationships where both parties gain? And when you get attacked, what works? Do you turn the other cheek, or do you retaliate immediately? And here's the real question. Are the strategies that helped humans survive thousands of years ago still the same strategies that matter now? To answer that, we're going to walk into something that sounds nerdy, but actually explains half the human conflict. Game theory. Game theory is the study of strategic decisions where your outcome depends on what other people choose. It's how you understand situations where your best move changes based on whether the other person is honest or a liar, whether they cooperate or betray. And the most famous example is the Iterated prisoner's dilemma. In this game, there are two players. Each round, each player chooses one of two moves. Cooperate, which is to uphold the deal, which is a win-win for each player, or defect or betray, which is breaking the deal for personal advantage. You make your move without knowing what the other person chose. Then the choices are revealed and the points are awarded. And here's the payoff structure. If both players cooperate, each gets 3 points, for a total of 6. This is the highest cumulative point total and ideally best for society. If both players betray, each player gets 1 point each, for a total of 2 cumulative points. If one cooperates and the other betrays, the betrayer gets 5, the cooperator gets 0. Translation, when a good guy makes a deal with a bad guy, the good guy gets screwed. And the game repeats, round after round. Not one round, not 2 rounds, hundreds. Like rock, paper, scissors, except psychology matters, and the consequences stack. The objective is simple. Accumulate the most points over time. There's no altruism here. No, be nice because it's nice. This is pure self-interest. You cooperate or betray based on what you think will get you the most amount of points over time. So, what strategies win? In early tournaments and simulations, researchers tested a bunch of strategies. I'm not going to go over all of them. I'm only going to cover a few that I think matter. Strategy number 1, always cooperate. This is kind of the pacifist or sane strategy. This player cooperates every time. Even if his opponent betrays him repeatedly, over and over, they keep cooperating. It's the ultimate pacifist or turn the other cheek strategy. Strategy number 2, always defect. This is the asshole or jerk strategy. This player betrays every time, no exceptions. It is a cutthroat strategy. Then we have strategy number 3, the tit-for-tat strategy. You may have heard of it. This one's legendary. It starts by cooperating, then it simply repeats whatever the opponents did last time. If you cooperated, it cooperates. If you betrayed, it betrays the next round. Proportional response, instant feedback. Strategy number 4. I'm going to call these forgiving variants. These are tit-for-tat strategies, Pavlovich styles. They forgive more. They don't retaliate immediately. They wait until they've been betrayed at least twice, or they use some kind of reward-punish loops. Then we have strategy number 5, the grim trigger. This is like the nuclear option. The player starts cooperative, but the first time he's betrayed, just once, he flips to a permanent switch. He will retaliate by betraying or defecting for every round after that until the game ends. This is the zero tolerance approach. One strike and you're out. And then there's strategy number 6, the random strategy, or as I like to call it, the psycho strategy. This player randomly cooperates or betrays. No pattern, no logic, no predictability. So what strategies do you think did the best? Who do you think won? Well, when these strategies were run head-to-head for hundreds of rounds, the winner was tit-for-tat. And tit-for-tat didn't just win, it dominated. It crushed most strategies. Technically, the worst was the random or the psycho. But at the bottom of the tier were also the always cooperate, which is the pacifist, and the always defect, or the asshole. So let that sink in. The best term long strategy wasn't be a saint or pacifist, and it wasn't be a predator. Those two strategies were among the top of the worst. But it gets even more interesting, or at least I found this to be more interesting. They came out with an evolutionary simulation version of this. Thousands of players, thousands of rounds. Strategies that earn the most points reproduced. Their strategy got copied into the next generation. The weak strategies died out. That's basically natural selection in a lab. And in that evolutionary scenario, tit-for-tat didn't just win. Again, it dominated, but even greater. It drove other strategies toward extinction. And this is why I think game theory matters. It seems to validate the argument for evolutionary psychology, that certain personality traits, trust, reciprocity, retaliation, forgiveness, aren't just cultural. They're partially rooted in the kinds of behaviors that have historically worked. Yes, culture matters. Yes, the environment matters. But it does not override our human nature. So, what are some of the key lessons we can take away from the tit-for-tat strategy that dominated this computer-simulated equivalent to natural selection? Well, for me, first and foremost, is that once again, even acting in the most superficially transparent, selfish manner to win the game, the best strategy was to cooperate. Every round or transaction, every purchase you make, every deal you make, when consensual, benefits both parties. Neither party would knowingly agree to a deal unless each party felt that they would be better off by doing so, right? Each person is doing what they think will improve their situation. And when both parties cooperate, they both benefit. Another important and critical aspect of the tit-for-tat strategy is retaliation. Tit-for-tat approach didn't turn the other cheek. It didn't say, it's okay, go ahead, kick me in the nuts, I'll take it, I'm not going to do anything. No, it immediately retaliated. The tit-for-tat strategy strikes back immediately when betrayed. It utilized a proportional response, a form of justice, and this moral reciprocity matters. If someone betrays you, they better expect payback, or they're just going to keep running all over you. At the same time, it also shows us that forgiveness is vital. While retaliation is essential, holding grudges long-term only drags you down. Tit-for-tat punishes betrayal but forgives quickly, getting back to cooperation as soon as possible. It's a simple strategy, but it builds trust, where trust and cooperation pay off over time. We can see in these evolutionary simulations over thousands of rounds that humans who relied on betrayal to survive, they died out. Similarly, the pacifist strategy, the always forgive strategy, was a loser. And the strategy that survived the test of time was tit-for-tat. You see these characteristics in animals as well. Whether it's the social grooming in primates, the punishment of cheaters in social species, this tit-for-tat approach allowed animals to grow and survive over time as well. Okay, Now it's time to get a little bit more controversial because now we're going to evaluate these human interaction strategies and how they differ among men and women. Using a little bit of artificial intelligence correlation, we can clearly see that the sexes have different predispositions. Let's start off with the women. The majority of women, about 30%, employed the tit-for-tat strategy. The next largest strategy used was tit-for-tats, which is more forgiving because it only starts betraying after 2 betrayals. The pattern you start to see is that women tend to employ significant always cooperate strategies. All in all, about 80% of the strategies that women use are forgiving strategies. And it should be noted, in evolutionary terms, these forgiving strategies are losing strategies if predators exist. And remember that because we're going to talk about predators in the next few chapters. All right, so how did the men do? Well, men also had their largest group as tit for tat. But unlike women, men had a much larger chunk and harsher strategies. And their second largest group was the always defect, 20%. And another 10% used the grim trigger strategy. So 30% of the strategies used by men were non-forgiving strategies. In many of these iterated social settings, women tend to show stronger cooperation. This is because biologically, psychologically, for women, maintaining relationships matter more. Social context matters more. Reputation sensitivity is higher, and restoring collaboration is prioritized. Men, on the other hand, biologically, psychologically, are more transactional. They have a sharper focus on winning. They're more willing to defect under high stakes, and they are more justice-oriented and ready to punish betrayal quickly. Having said that, a strategy in a game is not the same thing as ethics. Someone might defect because they're evil, or they might defect because they think you're about to defect. So take this correlation with a grain of salt before passing moral judgment, but still it's important to note that these tendencies still matter if we're going to build systems that work in the real world. And in the real world, we have to address the difference between being emotional and being aggressive, between empathy and justice, and understand which approach is better for society. Today in our society, we tend to lean more toward empathy, and we know that women tend to be more empathetic than men. So are they better people? Let's explore. Because modern politics worships empathy like it's the same thing as morality, but it's not. Empathy is a feeling. It's not an action. It's not a moral act by itself. A very common tool in psychology is the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, IRI. It breaks down empathy into parts. There's cognitive empathy, which is understanding what others feel, or the ability to adapt to another person's point of view. Women score 10 to 15% higher than men in this category. Then there's also affective empathy, referring to the feelings of compassion or concern for others, especially those who are in distress. This measures how people experience emotional sympathy for others who are suffering. Women score higher here too, by 15 to 20% more than men. And then there's personal distress, which reflects how much someone freaks out, feels personal discomfort or anxiety when witnessing somebody else in distress, like a punk harassing an old lady. Women score 15 to 25% higher than men. This is the biggest difference in empathy category among the sexes. So clearly, by a long shot, women are more empathetic than men. It's in their nature. But does this make them better than men? Society seems to tell us that. We're being basically fed that masculinity sucks, that it is toxic, and that empathy is far more morally superior than aggression. But I would like to throw the challenge flag here and provide you with a few counter-arguments. Counterpoint number 1. More empathy does not automatically mean more morality. Morality, in the framework that I've laid out, is about actions, especially coercive actions. Empathy is a feeling, not an action. And therefore, by my definition of morality, it is neither good nor bad as it is not an action. Counterpoint number 2. Actions based on empathy or good intentions do not always equate to good outcomes. And counterpoint number 3. Less empathy does not mean not caring. Men care. Men feel. We just don't tend to process and express it the same way. And to illustrate what I'm talking about, let's talk about justice. There's a framework often discussed in psychology called justice sensitivity, and this is how strongly you react to unfairness. And it's useful because it captures something empathy tests can miss. Some people respond to suffering by feeling. Some people respond to suffering by acting. Justice sensitivity can be broken down in different angles, like victim sensitivity. This is how you react when you yourself are being wronged. And then there's observer sensitivity. And this is how you react when someone else is being wronged, like that old lady being harassed by a punk. So, using the Justice Sensitivity Scale, the JSS, in the United States, when it comes to victim sensitivity, 70% of men show high aggression response. 20% show a moderate aggression response, which means somewhere around 90% are aggression-oriented responses in total. And this seems to align with the tit-for-tat retaliation type response as well. But here's where it gets interesting. In the observer sensitivity, that's the witnessing of injustice imposed upon others, the largest grouping of men fall into high aggression, which involves physical confrontation to stop the injustice. The largest group of women fall into low aggression, which is do little to nothing to resolve the injustice. So, what do these two different studies reveal? Well, women experience injustice more intensely, but men are more likely to confront it physically. Different tools, same species. Men are more likely to respond to injustice with confrontation, especially physical or direct intervention. Women are more likely to respond with emotional distress and indirect approaches. That's not sexist, it's science. It's not opinion, it's an acknowledgement of reality. But what is opinion is which one's better for society. If someone is being victimized in real time, which response stops the harm? Feeling bad or intervening? Empathy without action doesn't stop wolves. It just produces tears while the victim gets wrecked. So even from a utilitarian perspective, which one do you think is better for society? Humans that have the will and strength to stand up to injustice? Or humans who feel deeply and just cry about it? And yes, I know that sounds harsh. Reality is harsh. And here's a quick disclaimer for the critics. These stereotypes are not binary. Some women are braver than many men. Some men are more empathetic than many women. Well, we're talking about statistical distributions. We're talking about tendencies. And I don't want to hear any nonsense about this framework reinforcing gender roles. My answer is simple. Facts don't reinforce anything. Facts are just facts. If the truth makes you feel uncomfortable, then the truth's not the problem. The problem is with your ideology. This should have been obvious to you even without science. In general, good or bad, men are more aggressive than women. Our moral and legal systems need to reflect the reality of human nature, and that reality includes the fact that men and women respond differently to injustice. Don't let anyone convince you that these differences are solely a product of the environment. Men are biologically wired to respond to threats, especially when their natural rights are violated. We are coded to fight if necessary. On the average, we're bigger, stronger, faster. We have more muscle mass, 40-60% more upper body strength than women, along with greater bone density, which makes us more resilient to physical confrontations. Our skeletal frames are built for leverage and power. We recover faster from physical injuries. Our hands are designed for striking. Our jaws and skulls are thicker to withstand blows. We even experience adrenaline surges in our fights that dull pain. But it's not just physical. Our mental predispositions are shaped by the same genetic factors. Men tend to excel in tasks requiring visual spatial skills, which are critical in combat situations. We're better at judging distance, timing, and the trajectory of attacks, skills that have evolutionary significance. Our brains are primed for aggression because of the higher levels of testosterone, which triggers faster responses to perceived threats, along with our fast-twitch muscles. This isn't just a wild theory, it's biological reality. Men are prone to risk-taking and more willing to engage in physical confrontations when pushed. And this aggression is not random, it's purposeful. About 30 to 40% of men carry the warrior gene, which affects the neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, both crucial for regulating mood and aggression. When men with this gene experience stress or perceived injustice, they are statistically more likely to respond with impulsive aggression. This isn't just some outdated trait from our evolutionary past. It is a real part of who we are as a species, a response mechanism that's hardwired into our DNA. And why does this matter? Because nature has selected men to fight when necessary. Look at the animal kingdom. What's the number one reason males fight? Territorial disputes. This isn't just a coincidence. In nature, males defend their territory not only for survival, but to protect their offspring, their resources, their freedom to live without constant threat. They protect their territory for food, water, shelter, and peace of mind. Does this sound familiar? It should, because the reasons animals defend their territory mirror the very reasons we defend our natural rights. Men are instinctually wired to protect their lives, their property, their privacy, and their freedom, just as animals defend their territory. It is the same genetic drive, manifesting itself in different forms, but rooted in the same purpose. This territorial instinct is directly tied to the defense of our natural rights. It's not a stretch to say that a male's drive to protect one's right is a reflection of the same biological imperatives that compel male animals to defend their territory. When men's natural rights are infringed upon, it triggers a deep-seated genetic response. This isn't just a preference, it's ingrained in our DNA. Living in a society that respects liberty and natural rights is essential, especially for men. Now let's go back to the iterated prisoner's dilemma. Why did researchers repeat the game hundreds of times? Because repeated interaction is where trust has a chance to form. Trusting someone, for most men, requires pattern recognition, requires repeated interaction with that person. That person has to earn your trust. Think about life 100 years ago, thousands of years ago. Hunter-gatherers didn't live in anonymous megacities. You interacted with the same people constantly in a tribe, in a small town, in a community. Reputations mattered. Your word mattered. There were consequences for your social interactions. Tit-for-Tat thrives in that environment. It thrives in our 200-island scenario, too. In a society with only 200 people, everyone will eventually know everyone else. There's no realistic chance of any anonymity. Tit-for-Tat thrives in almost any scenario where you're dealing with a few hundred people repeatedly over your lifetime. However, when you interface with thousands of strangers regularly, anonymity increases. Your reputation, your word, your character are not as well known. You care less about the opinion of someone you'll never see again. Now scale that to today's society. In these megacities of millions, anonymity is off the charts. Throw in the internet and social media, which we'll discuss in a future podcast, and good Lord, anonymity is almost guaranteed. But now let's shift this iterated prisoner's dilemma to their one-shot game version. In this IPD scenario, you only interact once, then you disappear. There are no consequences, no reputation, no future penalty. This is the equivalent of only interacting once with a complete unknown stranger that you will never see again, assuming you've even met them in real life. In these one-shot IPD games, betrayal becomes more attractive because there's no long-term cost. In the typical IPD scenario, men might betray 15 to 35% of the time, women slightly less. But in the one-shot IPD game, that betrayal skyrockets to about 70 to 80%. Women jump up to about 50 to 70%. But the key point is that men betray more often. And that matters because modern society today has allowed for an exponential increase in anonymity. And this series is focused on establishing a moral framework that works today with the human nature we have now. Not the social animal we may or may not be if we're not extinct hundreds of thousands of years from now. I mean right now. In the last chapter, we left our 200-island model with a moral baseline that everybody respects and that's aligned with natural rights. But we know that's not realistic, currently or historically. We know of no civilization, none, where a percentage of people didn't prey on others. And here's a little fun fact for you. You don't need many predators to destabilize a society. A small number can create fear, revenge cycles, and collapse trust. So imagine in the 200 islands, a couple dead bodies show up, a couple homes get raided, someone gets abducted, a handful of coordinated attackers start using force to take what they want. In a group of only 200, a handful of predators is a massive destabilizer. Without protection, people stop cooperating. They stop planning. They stop building. They stop trusting. They start guarding, hoarding, isolating. And suddenly your society is no longer happy and productive. Instead, it goes into survival mode. Life becomes nasty, brutish, and short, as Thomas Hobbes would put it. And here's why. Production requires stability. Quality of life requires stability. One's ability to pursue their happiness requires stability. Nobody builds a thriving life when they're sleeping with one eye open. If we now scale up our island scenario to millions of people spread out across 50 large islands, now anonymity is real. Now predators feel emboldened because they can hide. And when people believe they won't be identified or caught, more of them will behave badly. Darkroom studies support this. When people believe they won't get caught and act anonymously, many will make selfish, unjust decisions. In these psychology study settings, about 50 to 60% of men are likely to act unjustly if they believe no one's watching, compared to about 30 to 40% of women. Women, it seems, are generally more resistant to this kind of behavior, but they're still susceptible. It should be noted, and I don't think this is a trivial nuance, the reason people tend to behave more badly when operating anonymously is not necessarily because they will be caught, but because being caught translates into consequences. They fear the justice. We see this on a small scale today to some degree in the United States in certain cities and counties, where repeat violent offenders and predators are allowed back on the streets after committing horrific violations of others' natural rights. So we can imagine how bad it would be if there were no justice system. A justice system may not prevent crime, but it definitely acts as a deterrent to committing crime that might have occurred if the perpetrators thought they could get away with it. I would like to tell you a story. It is the parable of the sheep, wolves, and sheepdogs. This analogy was first introduced by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman, a retired U.S. Army Ranger and a military psychologist, to explain the roles people play in society. And it goes like this. Most people in our society are sheep. They are kind, gentle, productive creatures who can only hurt one another by accident. This is true for most people. Sheep do not like to think that there are wolves in the world who will hurt them or that evil exists. They prefer to believe that evil is something that happens to other people and other places far removed from their daily lives. Then there are wolves. These are the predators who feed on the sheep without remorse. They commit acts of violence, murder, rape, and destruction. They use their power over others to cause suffering. Wolves enjoy preying on the weak and the innocent. Now, there are sheepdogs. The sheepdogs live to protect the flock and confront the wolves. They possess the ability to fight and defend, yet they do not harm the sheep. Sheepdogs are capable of violence, but they use their strength and skills to keep the wolves at bay and protect the sheep. The sheepdog's job is to guard the flock and stand up to the wolves, even when the sheep do not understand or appreciate it. Sheepdogs often look scary to the sheep because they are strong and they have a capacity for violence, which frightens those who don't understand it. The sheep don't always like the sheepdog because the sheepdog reminds them that there are wolves in the world. The sheep would prefer to forget about the wolves entirely. The presence of the sheepdog can make the sheep uncomfortable, but when the wolf shows up, the sheep look for the sheepdog for protection. The sheepdog loves his flock and would give up his life to protect them. Sheepdogs know that the world is not always safe and peaceful, and they are ready to face the evil when it comes, without hesitation. They are vigilant, ever watchful, and prepare for the fight for those who cannot defend themselves. On September 11, 2001, there were sheepdogs on Flight 93 who took down the wolves and saved many lives. In Columbine High School, there were sheepdogs who ran toward the sound of gunfire to confront the wolves. We need sheepdogs in our society, but they are often misunderstood and sometimes resented by those they protect. The sheepdogs may seem aggressive, but their aggression is what stands between the sheep and the wolves. The sheep live in denial that evil exists, but the sheepdog cannot afford that luxury. They know the wolves are real, and they train to face them when necessary. The sheepdog does not want to fight, but he is always ready. He would prefer to live in a world in peace, but he will not allow the wolves to harm the flock. So that's the parable. Wolves are wolves because they violate natural rights. And yes, law enforcement and military fit this parable, but it also maps onto civilians, people willing to intervene, defend, confront. A free society needs deterrence. Deterrence requires consequences. Consequences require legitimate enforcement. And yes, violent predation is overwhelmingly male, statistically and historically, but defense is also overwhelmingly male. Men contain more extremes, more wolves and more sheepdogs. And a society that hates sheepdogs because they look aggressive, appear toxic, behave in a masculine manner, is a society that eventually gets eaten. How bad is this problem? Bad enough that we don't even know how many of these predators are out there in the U.S. And because of our recent asinine policies on open borders over the last few decades, we have no idea how many foreign-born predators we currently have. Look, compassion is human, but compassion without boundaries is how predators exploit systems. It should be apparent to you by now what happens when always cooperate meets always betray. It's not pretty, and you shouldn't need perfect certainty to justify basic risk control. If your job is to protect the flock, you don't wait until the wolf is already in your living room to say, gosh, maybe we should have locked the door. Regardless, based on violent crime rates, antisocial personality prevalence, repeat violent offenders, anonymity studies, darkroom experiments, we know there are millions of men out there who are willing to use violence and kill for nefarious reasons, for misguided ideological reasons, and sometimes just for a pair of sneakers. I'll explain this number in a future podcast, but I speculate that there are at least 7 million predators in the U.S. right now. The good news is there's still a lot of good men out there too, equally as aggressive and willing to defend themselves, their family, and by default, their community from these predators. All right, so where are we so far? If you want a society based on natural rights, where people can safely cooperate, trade, build, love, create, take risks, learn, grow, and pursue their happiness, then you need moral boundaries, plus a realistic model of human nature, and a justice system that enforces the red line without becoming a tyrant. Because predators don't just disappear because you wish them away. And if your system can't handle wolves, then your system doesn't work. So we now arrive at the question that actually scares a lot of people today. What is justice? What is just punishment? What consequences are morally appropriate for coercion? Well, that's the next chapter. And we're going to do it the same way we've done everything else so far. No slogans, no feelings first nonsense, no utopian fantasies. Just logic, human nature, and a moral boundary you can defend. So if you're interested, for the love of God, hit subscribe, like the bell, whatever you got to do. I think I mentioned this before. I don't do this for a living, and it's the only way I can gauge interest. And people's interest will drive me to either put these out more often or, I'll get around to it when I get around to it. And with that, peace out from Virginia.